My husband lost the wedding game and had to feed Claire wine, mouth to mouth, at the wedding reception. Claire pulled out $200,000 in cash gifts and tearfully hugged my husband. If Audrey weren't here, would you marry me? He responded affectionately, I would. Everyone was shocked and everyone looked at me with mocking eyes. I didn't care at all. I was the first to clap. Let's congratulate this couple for finally getting together. May you have many children. Mason and I had been in love for 8 years, and we finally held our wedding on National Day. I wore a bright suit, waiting quietly in the room for him to come. After waiting for a long time without seeing anyone, I heard a burst of cheers from outside. Looking up, I saw that it was my groom, Mason, and his childhood friend, Claire. They had lost a game and had to face the punishment. There was no rush. Mason picked up the glass from the table, filled his mouth with wine, and kissed Claire's lips. Their lips and tongues touched, making a sound, and the wine soaked their collars. It took them a good 10 seconds before they separated. Claire's face was flushed, and her lips were bright red and slightly swollen. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. Their gazes were filled with mockery, sympathy, and schadenfreude. Claire's hand was still on Mason's waist as she looked at me intently, without letting go, with no trace of guilt, and even with a hint of provocation. Claire laughed at me and said, I was just helping you test the wedding game, don't be mad. I wanted to ask what kind of game would make you feed someone else's husband. Wine mouth to mouth at a wedding, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Surprisingly, I didn't feel angry at all. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. But my best friend didn't feel the same. She rolled up her sleeves, ready to start a fight. Mason stepped in front of Claire, glaring at me. Audrey, if your friend dares to touch Claire today, this wedding is off. I nodded. I pulled my friend back and motioned for them to continue with the game. Seeing me silent, Mason assumed I was angry. Can you stop being so jealous? How many times have I told you, Claire is just like a sister to me? His tone was full of frustration. I gave him a lazy smile and replied, I'm not mad. You guys go ahead with the game, we'll wait in the room. Faced with my calm response, he had nothing more to say and sat down to continue playing truth or dare with his buddies. Soon, Mason lost again, and he chose truth. Claire quickly took the chance to ask a question, looking at him tenderly. If Audrey weren't here, would you marry me? As she spoke, she pulled out a black duffel bag from behind her, revealing stacks of $100 bills inside. There's $200,000 in here. It can't be a dowry, so just take it as a gift. Faced with this unexpected scene, Mason froze for a moment but quickly regained his composure, looking moved and emotional. Amid the shocked gazes of the crowd, he slowly nodded and said, I would. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock as they all turned to look at me. I got up from the bed, hiding my entertained expression, and began clapping. Let's congratulate this couple for finally getting together. May you have many children. Mason frowned and spoke up, clearly unhappy. Audrey, how many times have I told you? It's just a stupid game. What's with this nonsense? Are you crazy? It's our wedding day, what do you mean by saying that? Are you trying to call off the wedding? Listening to his accusations, I couldn't help but find it all amusing. Who exactly doesn't want to get married? He spoke again, we're not even married. Yet, and your possessiveness is already out of control. I hate being tied down. You better change this nasty habit today. Saying that, he slammed the door. You should stay in here, narrow-minded and jealous as you are. We can't enjoy ourselves with you around. Claire looked smug as she provocatively held onto Mason's arm. Don't worry, you stay here. We'll call you when the game's over. On my wedding day, my husband shut me out of the room. I was forced to watch him act all intimate with another woman while the guests gossiped, holding their envelopes. Just thinking about it made me feel pathetic and ridiculous. But everyone else seemed to think it was completely normal. They weren't surprised by Mason and Claire's flirting. In fact, they acted like my role as the clown in all of this was perfectly natural. In the past, I would have flipped the table and screamed at everyone. It would have ended in an ugly argument. Mason would say that he and Claire were just friends, and I was the one with dirty thoughts. He would be disappointed in me, claiming I was ruining everything and didn't trust him. No matter what I said, he would give me the silent treatment and even meet up with Claire on purpose just to make me jealous. Until I finally begged for forgiveness like a dog, only then would he interrogate me, making me admit I was possessive to the point of being irrational, and that I needed to trust him unconditionally. Over the years, through constant manipulation, I had turned into a lunatic who followed Mason's every word. Even on our wedding day, I still found myself instinctively questioning whether I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew it was them who were in the wrong. The door closed, cutting off the view, and only the noise of laughter and chaos from outside could be heard. I leaned against the window, watching the lively scene below. My friends followed behind, fuming with anger. This is just too much. If this wedding doesn't happen, who cares anyway? But any more words were quickly swallowed as they glanced at my expression and chose not to continue. Everyone thought this wedding wasn't Mason's idea, but something I had begged for. Not long ago, Mason said he wanted to marry me, and I agreed. I had naively believed that after 8 years of waiting, I was finally going to get my happy ending. But today's events were like cold water, waking me up. My best friend, Sophie, who had spoken up for me earlier, was frustrated beyond words. You've been humiliated like this, and you still want to marry him. I looked at Sophie and said, then I won't. As I spoke, I started taking off the golden hairpins and jewelry. Sophie was startled and quickly stopped me. Are you crazy? She looked at my calm face, then sighed. Sadly, forget it, your happiness is what matters. Maybe after the wedding he'll settle down. Sophie had been my close friend since childhood and was a witness to my relationship with Mason. During college, Mason was the handsome, star student, and I was just a bespectacled nerd struggling to make ends meet. Ridiculously, I also had depression. The day I graduated from high school, my father passed away. My mother remarried, leaving me with just $200, as if telling me to fend for myself. My exam results came out, and the good news was that I got into a top university. The bad news was that I couldn't afford the tuition. Even if I could apply for a student loan, the living expenses were suffocating me. Life and studies left me exhausted, feeling weak and inferior. I was bullied and insulted by those around me. I always kept to myself, avoiding others, with Sophie as my only friend. With my withdrawn personality and depression, I became an outcast. My dorm mates and classmates isolated me and even bullied me. During that time, I often sat on the rooftop, contemplating jumping off countless times. It was Mason who sat beside me, brought me cake, listened to music with me, and let me vent about the frustrations of life. Knowing I was struggling financially and had to take on part-time jobs, he quietly stayed by my side, walking with me through those difficult times. When he learned I was being bullied, he didn't care about the mocking stares. He held my hand, letting everyone know that I had a friend. Once, at a class gathering, a girl who liked Mason deliberately made things difficult for me, daring me to kiss him in front of everyone. I was panicked, and the mocking jeers only magnified my insecurity. But Mason calmly smiled and waved at me. 50% 140648 It's fine, kiss me. I like you too. At that moment, the breeze lifted the hair from his forehead. As if by some unseen force, I reached out and held his hand tightly. In the countless nights that followed, I always felt like I had grasped the hand of a god. Eventually, we really got together, though no one believed in us. They envied and mocked me, saying Mason was like a flower planted in manure. His admirers never took me seriously, thinking I was just someone he spent time with out of boredom. I was incredibly anxious, constantly fearing someone would steal him away, or that he would leave me. So I did everything I could to be good to him, like a devout follower, offering up everything in my life to him. He gave me affection and a sense of security in return. When Claire came back to the country, everything changed. His attitude toward me became more and more dismissive, and his interactions with Claire became increasingly inappropriate. They had long crossed the boundaries of friendship. Yet I didn't give up. I willingly stayed by his side. I was even afraid to think about how I would live without him. I thought people aren't made of stone. Eventually, he would warm up to me. But now, I felt cold inside. I was unable to warm him anymore, and I didn't want to try either. Maybe. I went along with Sophie's suggestion and strode out of the room. Outside, Mason was holding Claire, and everyone around was cheering. When Claire saw me come out, she shyly snuggled deeper into Mason's arms. His face darkened. Who told you to come out? Mason scolded me harshly as I stood there silently, not making a move. Even now, he still thought he had done nothing wrong. I glanced at him indifferently. If you feel wronged, we can choose another day to get married. As soon as I finished speaking, Mason grabbed my wrist forcefully. You don't want to marry me, is that it? If you don't want to get married, just say it. Who are you trying to show your attitude to? He glared at me, tense and furious. He still thought it was my fault. I stood my ground and spoke coldly. Hasn't it always been up to you whether we get married or not? Mason was so stunned by my words that he couldn't respond. Mason cared deeply about his reputation. The fact that he hadn't left already after such humiliation was unusual. Mason spoke up when I thought he couldn't take it and would ruin the wedding. Of course, we're getting married. I was momentarily stunned, but he quickly shattered any illusion I had. But I want Claire with me. As he said this, he had already taken Claire's hand. Claire's face lit up with joy and she quickly agreed, blushing. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought they were the ones getting married. As they walked ahead, all eyes turned back to me. People were looking at me with disdain, mockery, and schadenfreude. It was painfully obvious. Should I throw a tantrum right here and give you all what you're waiting for? I shot them a cold smile and followed behind. As I instinctively reached for the handle of the lead car, Claire poked her head out. She gave me a taunting smile. Audrey, Mason wants me by his side for the most important moments of his life. Is that okay with you? You two getting married? I was about to retort but caught a glimpse of Mason's indifferent expression. I swallowed my words and opened the door to the passenger seat. If the groom didn't care, why should I? Just to humiliate myself. I smiled back and handed the bouquet to Claire. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Mason's gaze fixed on me, his brows furrowed. I knew he was angry. But I didn't say a word. I just closed my eyes to rest. The car was quiet until we were almost at the hotel, when Mason finally couldn't hold back. Audrey, what's your deal? I was confused. What do you mean? Mason grabbed the bouquet from Claire's hand and threw it onto the back seat, scattering fresh petals everywhere. I really don't understand what game you're playing. Who are you trying to impress? With this act, I've made it clear Claire is just a friend. I'm marrying you, what more do you want? Claire chimed in, Audrey, I don't mean to say this. As a woman, you should be more generous. Sure, I like Mason, but you're the one marrying him. What are you so worried about? Isn't a wedding supposed to be a happy occasion for everyone? The teasing during the reception is normal, and when we play games after, there'll be more intimate moments like kissing. You're not going to stop us, are you? I lifted my eyelids and knowingly nodded. Sure, when it's time for the wedding games, I'll leave with everyone. You can do whatever you want. One could clearly feel that Claire wanted to steal Mason away from me, that's why she was always trying to provoke me. And after I'd get mad, she'd act all innocent, telling Mason I twisted her words to bully her. She succeeded every time because Mason's heart was always on her side. Then he'd scold me for being jealous and petty. Suddenly, I realized how foolish I was back then, fighting like we were in some ridiculous royal harem. Claire didn't get what she wanted. Of course, she wasn't going to let it go. She sneered sarcastically. Your mind is as filthy as always. Mason and I are innocent. Why do you keep imagining things? 80% 1400 hours 517 it's your wedding with Mason. Do you really have to humiliate him like this? Who's humiliating who? Does someone who knowingly becomes the third wheel have any right to speak? I shot back coldly. It wasn't that I was jealous of Claire. I just wanted to stand up for myself and stop being a doormat. Mason saw an opening and assumed I was jealous. He sighed, his expression exasperated. Audrey, how long are you going to be this childish? If I didn't love you, would I have married you? In the past, I would have argued back, saying marriage doesn't equal love and that Claire was a manipulative snake. But I didn't want to argue anymore. I just looked straight ahead, letting him say whatever he wanted. Mason finally lost his temper because of my indifference and shouted at me, Audrey, what does your silence mean? Do you think I'm wrong? You might also like marrying his rival Bethany from now on. I only love you from now on. I only love you Beth, marry you again, never get away, marry you again. Never get away. I let out a cold laugh, playing along. How could you be wrong? It's me who judged you unfairly. I gave my usual response, but my tone carried an unfamiliar ease and mockery. Maybe I was mistaken. For a moment, I saw a flash of panic in Mason's eyes, though it quickly disappeared, too fleeting to grasp. As arrogant as he was, he wouldn't dwell on it. Thinking I was scared like before, he smugly ordered, I'll take you inside. His tone dripped with charity. When we arrived at the front hall, all the invited relatives and friends were already there. Mason walked half a mile ahead of me, holding Claire's arm. The usher naturally turned to Claire and said, the bride needs to be separated from the groom for a while. Claire glanced at me proudly, offering no explanation. I was about to leave with a sneer when Mason grabbed my wrist and explained to the usher, what are you talking about? This is my wife. It was the first time he had ever said that. Mason stood up for me and called me his wife. But soon after, as if my hand had burned him, he let go. The ceremony flowed smoothly. Soon, it was time for the bouquet toss. Mason didn't say anything and handed the bouquet to Claire, passing right by me. His eyes were slightly red and moist. I hope you find happiness. Claire, holding Mason tightly, said tearfully, Mason, you'll soon belong to someone else. As a friend, can you give me one last kiss? I stared at Claire in shock. I was astonished by her shamelessness. But what surprised me more was the crowd egging them on. Mason and I hadn't informed our parents about the wedding, only inviting a few close friends. I had painfully few friends and most of the guests were Masons. Before the wedding, I had mentioned that it should be formal, with both our parents invited. Otherwise it would seem like child's play. But he claimed I didn't respect his wishes and if I didn't want to marry, I should just say it. The crowd immediately began to shout excitedly, "Kiss! Kiss!" The host had never seen anything like this, and didn't know how to proceed. Their chests were pressed together, noses almost touching, as if they were about to become one. Claire didn't forget to shoot me a provoking glance, while Mason held on for only 10 seconds. This was being humiliated right in front of me. And at our wedding, any other woman would have already lashed out at these two. But I didn't move. I even maintained a perfectly composed expression. Was I not a woman? Of course, I was. I just didn't love Mason anymore. But that didn't stop Mason's friends from coming after me. Grayson was the worst of them, yelling the loudest. "Audrey, how many times have I said it? Mason and Claire are just good friends. Friends hugging and kissing is normal. I don't get why you're so jealous. We feel sorry for Mason dealing with a control freak like you. He's got no freedom at all. If it were me, I couldn't take it anymore. This wedding shouldn't even happen." Mason's friends started to gaslight me. It had always been like this. Whether I was jealous or not, as long as I was by Mason's side, they would criticize and lecture me. "Grayson, does that mean we're friends?" Grayson was stunned for a moment, then replied, "Of course. Mason and I are like brothers and you're about to be his wife. Already think of you as my sister-in-law." Mason looked at Grayson, his eyes full of emotion. The air was filled with a sense of deep brotherhood. I inwardly laughed and suddenly leaned toward Grayson. Amidst his gasp of surprise, I stood on tiptoe and kissed him. While Mason and Claire had only kissed for 10 seconds, I kissed Grayson for more than 30 seconds, nearly taking his breath away. Grayson came to his senses and pushed Matt away. At that moment, everyone was dumbfounded. No one had ever imagined that I, so devoted to Mason, would do something so outrageous as to kiss another man right in front of him. One person was the first to shout at me, "Audrey, that's cheating. How could you do this to Mason?" "Yeah, and at the wedding no less. Are you out of your mind? So kissing and hugging someone else counts as cheating, huh? I thought they didn't know. Audrey, are you crazy?" Grayson looked at me in disbelief. "You might also like marrying his rival Bethany from now and I love you from now on. I only love you Beth, marry you again, never get away, marry you again. Never get away." I smiled at him warmly. "Aren't we just friends? Why the rush? There's nothing between us. Mason won't get mad, right?" I turned to look at Mason. Mason's face was pale and he looked a bit on edge. "Audrey, have you lost your mind?" I met his gaze calmly and said casually, "Was I wrong to do this?" He pointed at me, then at Grayson, gritting his teeth as he asked, "What are you doing?" "We're just friends. Don't let your mind go to dark places." I threw his own words back at him. "Audrey, are you getting back at me? You kissed Grayson just to spite me. How could you do that to me?" He was furious, like I had committed an unforgivable crime. But I had only done what he always said was fine. I was speechless. "You all said kissing and hugging between friends is normal. I was just listening to you. Why are you so mad? Audrey, are you dense? Mason and Claire have been close since childhood. How is that the same?" I laughed out loud. "What's different about it? It's still cheating, isn't it? She can cheat, but I'm supposed to stay pure." Mason wanted to accuse me, but he couldn't say a word, only clinging to what had just happened in anger. "I thought you loved me the most, but I never expected you to do this. I'm so disappointed in you." After saying that, he grabbed Claire and was about to leave. I shifted my numb and cold body. He thought I was going to apologize. "Audrey, after what you did at our wedding, I could never forgive you." I looked up, confused. "Huh?" Realizing he misunderstood, his rage flared again. "I'm not coming home tonight. Claire and I are going to get our marriage license." Seeing my reaction, real fear flashed in Mason's eyes, not just for a moment but genuinely. His lips even trembled a little. Yet, he still wouldn't bend for me, not even once. Without showing any sign of compromise, he pulled Claire along and left. As they walked out, Claire gave me a mocking smile, gripping Mason's hand tightly, as if to stake her claim. I found it funny and let them leave. With the main players gone, there was no point in sticking around, so the others trickled out too. And just like that, the wedding ended in a mess. I had planned for us to fly to Tanax's for our honeymoon right after the wedding. It had almost drained half of my savings, but I was willing to do it for him. Now, there was no need for that anymore. I canceled all the flights and hotel reservations and even canceled my vacation. I'd go back to work tomorrow. That night, I heard footsteps. I knew Mason had come back. but I had no desire to go out and see him. That wasn't normal for me. Before, I would have rushed out to apologize like a servant, asking if he was tired, hungry, or if he wanted some soup to sober up. But now, I lay on my soft bed, not tired, just not wanting to move. I slept through the night until morning. When I opened my eyes, I saw Mason sitting in a chair by the bed, looking like he'd aged 10 years. "Why didn't you sleep in bed?" I frowned as I asked, then started getting dressed and went to wash up. He followed me, then suddenly hugged me tightly from behind. I didn't marry Claire. My hand froze mid-brush. Was Mason trying to make amends? But he quickly shattered that illusion. "Tomorrow night, I'm organizing a gathering. You'll apologize to Grayson and the others, and Claire will be there too." My heart, which had just started to warm, turned cold again. "So you think I was wrong yesterday?" Mason replied, his tone displeased. "Wasn't it? You disrupted the entire wedding. That wasn't polite." I disrupted the wedding. I found it laughable. Was I supposed to just stand by and watch my husband embrace another woman at our wedding without doing anything? That was absurd. Mason let go of me, looking incredulous. "When did you become so rude? Are you really saying the wedding wasn't your fault?" I opened my mouth, wanting to say more, but I swallowed my words. "If we could have talked this out, we would have by now. Cancel the gathering." "I'm not going," I said. I had defied him again and again, and Mason finally lost his patience. "Don't push your luck. I've already given you an out and you still won't take it." The look on his face made it seem like I was being completely unreasonable. "I don't need your out, Mason. Keep it for yourself. I'm your girlfriend, not your slave." That was all I had to say. Whether he listened or not, from the moment he asked me to apologize, I had already lost all hope. Mason's eyes turned red and he angrily shouted after me, "So, you don't love me anymore?" I didn't understand how not being a slave and love were related, but I nodded truthfully. "It seems I don't love you as much anymore." As soon as I said that, Mason grabbed my shoulders like he'd seen a ghost. "Audrey, you've lost your mind." Watching his figure disappear into the distance, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. After that day, Mason didn't come home again. I was too lazy to ask. I got off work on time every day, ate on time, and slept on time. Thanks to this routine and a healthy diet, the dark circles under my eyes had lightened up quite a bit. One day, while I was scrolling through my phone, a notification alert sounded. I opened it. It was a photo from Mason. It was a beach photo of him in a bikini, showing off his smooth 8-pack abs. In the picture, Claire's hand was visible, applying sunscreen to Mason's abs. There was no caption, just a picture filled with unmistakable intimacy. I clicked over to Claire's social media. There they were holding hands tightly. Her caption read, "Look at the person right in front of you." She was bold and bare-faced. Normally, I would have dialed Mason's number over and over, maybe even dropped everything and rushed to confront them, acting irrationally. But now, I just moved my finger and liked both of their posts. Was I upset? Of course. After all these years, the man I treated like my life was flirting with someone else. Of course, it hurt. But hasn't it always been like this? I had long since built up an immunity to it. I didn't let it bother me. I kept working and living as usual. I was fulfilled and happy. I was even given a new project by my manager due to my high efficiency at work, and the prospects were bright. I worked late that evening, and by the time I left the office, it was already 10 p.m. To my surprise, I saw Mason's car parked outside the company. This was the first big thing we saved up for together after graduation. But this car rarely came to pick me up. It was Claire who drove it time and time again. The passenger side window rolled down, slowly, revealing Mason's handsome face. "Get in. I'll take you home." At the same time, the driver's side window went down, and Claire waved at me from inside. "Audrey, we came to pick you up." They looked like the couple just swinging by to pick up a friend. I suddenly felt a bit nauseous and turned to walk back toward the office. Mason got out of the car and grabbed my arm, sounding frustrated. "How long are you going to keep this up?" I calmly answered, "I'm not making a scene." "Really? You know what it's like when I throw a fit." I'll hit Claire, slapping myself, demanding answers with tears in my eyes, even hurting myself, but I'm not doing that now, am I? My voice caught a little at the end. No matter how hot the summer got, I never dared to wear short sleeves because my arms were covered in scars from self-harm. I had treated Mason as the most important thing in my life. He wasn't at fault, it was all on me. Every single scar was my punishment to myself. It hurt too much. I had a problem, but I didn't want to keep being sick. Mason stood there, stunned, and said in disbelief, "Why aren't you making a scene? Why aren't you hurting yourself anymore?" "It's too painful." I closed my eyes. Then I turned back toward the office. I've still got some work to finish. You guys should go. Mason didn't say anything else. I had walked quite a distance before I heard him shout behind me, Audrey, I'm giving you one last chance. If you turn back now, I'll pretend none of this ever happened. But if you take one more step, I'm really going to go sleep with Claire. I paused for just a moment, then continued walking without hesitation. Once you've decided to move forward, don't ever look back. They drove away. I worked overtime at the office until dawn. I forced myself to stay busy, drinking coffee endlessly, as if it could numb my mind and stop me from thinking about anything else. After years of obsession, truly forgetting someone is no easy task. As the sky began to brighten, I lifted my head to look at the sunrise. Out of nowhere, I had a strange craving for fondue. Since being with him, I hadn't touched anything like that. He preferred light meals and never ate out, always watching his figure. To match his preferences, I gave up spicy food, sugar, and anything greasy, turning into another version of Mason, losing who I was. Do you think I didn't want him to notice everything I did for him? Of course, I did. I'm not some selfless saint. I wanted him to appreciate me, to love me a little more. But sadly, he never noticed. He took everything for granted. That night, the two of them spent it at a hotel. Claire sent me multiple photos from different angles on my phone. In the hotel bathroom's frosted mirror, their intimate figures were reflected. I glanced at the photo, then turned off my phone. What he did no longer mattered to me. He was free to do as he pleased. I had eaten too much that morning, so I didn't go to the cafeteria for lunch. I stayed at my desk. Just as I was about to catch up on sleep, Mason arrived. He stood right by my desk, holding a thermos box in his hand. His face was pale, nothing like the confident and composed man he used to be. Last night I wasn't with Claire. I nodded. Got it. Mason didn't seem relieved. Instead, he looked even more panicked. You don't believe me? I shook my head. I was tired from staying up all night, and my voice carried a hint of irritation. Does it really matter if I believe you or not? The photos were proof enough. Besides, isn't this the kind of thing you know best yourself? His eyes were red. Why do you always doubt me? I've explained 1,000 times, she's just a friend. Exhaustion had drained all my patience. I took out my phone and showed him the photos Claire had sent me. I didn't say a word, but he was the one who questioned me first. Why do you still have her contact info? Oh, right. Mason didn't want me to know more about his whereabouts, so he forbade me from having the contact information of any of his friends. I had secretly added Claire. Of course, she accepted, eager to flaunt things in my face. Even now, she refused to reflect on her actions, always quick to blame others. I deleted her contact right in front of him because I no longer needed it. Is that enough? Go home, I'm tired. Mason smiled, satisfied, and set the thermos box on my desk. Eat it while it's hot. I stopped him. Take it away. I don't want it. I made this myself. He seemed uncharacteristically shy, even wearing a bandage on his finger. But I coldly repeated, take it away, I'm not hungry. Mason's eyes widened. For a moment, he seemed at a loss. I spent a long time making this. Why won't you eat it? He stubbornly opened the box, revealing nothing but chicken breast and broccoli. I had no appetite, I even felt a bit nauseous. Take it away. Mason lost it. Audrey, what are you acting all high and mighty for? I've gone this far, what more do you want? So spending the night with someone else and then making me a low-fat meal the next day is what you call compromise. I wanted to laugh but couldn't. Suddenly, I didn't even know who I had loved all these years. I rubbed my tired, aching eyes. I'm tired. Just go. Mason was completely panicked, his face drained of all color. You shouldn't be like this, Audrey. You should eat your meal in front of me, smile with price, balance, 846 coins, 199 coins, 158 bonus unlock auto purchase next 7 chapter S. Mason was completely panicked, his face drained of all color. You shouldn't be like this, Audrey. You should eat your meal in front of me, smile with price, balance, 846 coins, 199 coins, 158 bonus unlock auto purchase next 1208. Mason was completely panicked, his face drained of all color. You shouldn't be like this, Audrey. You should eat your meal in front of me, smile with satisfaction, praise me for being thoughtful, and for how good the food is. Then, you'd walk me downstairs, buy me a gift as a reward, and come back to the office with me, planting a kiss on my forehead. His tone was steady, as if he had gone through this scenario countless times. Indeed, every time he treated me well, I acted like a frog adored by a swan. I would do everything for him like a lovesick fool. But calling myself a lovesick fool didn't feel right, because I truly loved him, and was willing to do anything for him. I shook my head and said seriously, not anymore, it won't happen again. 48-209. Why? What went wrong? You loved me so much, why won't you do it for me anymore? I sighed. You know the answer. I used to love you, but now I don't. It was as if all the life had been sucked out of him, his face turning a frightening shade of gray. No, you can't do this. You're only supposed to love me. You can't abandon me. He finally started to cry, as if he had lost the most precious thing in his life. Colleagues kept coming back and they all stood at the door watching the scene unfold. I escorted him downstairs to the company entrance. Go home. Don't make a scene here. You care about appearances more than anything. Mason blocked my way, using both his hands and feet. 48. Please don't leave me, Audrey. You still care about me, don't you? You still love me, right? I didn't answer and instead took half a day off to take him home. On the couch, Mason cried and admitted his mistakes. I went to the bedroom, ready to pack everything and leave. Since I had already decided to leave, it was better to rip the band-aid off. But he went crazy, stopping me. You're abandoning me. Don't leave me. I was wrong. I was really wrong. He knelt in front of me. The once proud man had finally set aside his pride, but I felt nothing as I helped him back up. March 9, 2009. 48. We're always fighting. Do you really think that's normal? Let's stop torturing each other. You're handsome and plenty of people want you. There's no need to be so desperate. But he didn't hear a word, just stared at me intently. No, we've been together for 8 years. We're married. How can you just heartlessly leave me? I spoke seriously. We didn't get married. The wedding ended in chaos. Did you forget? I'll leave the car and the house to you. I'm only taking what's mine, nothing more. I took only a single suitcase, sticking to my word. But he grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. I don't want anything. I only want you. 1409. April 9, 2009. Audrey, don't leave me. I'll die without you. I pried his hand off and walked away without looking back. I had just stepped out the door. Mason shouted at me, if you take one more step, I'll kill myself right in front of you. He held a knife to his neck, the stubbornness in his eyes terrifying. In that moment, I remembered how I used to be, how I was once just as crazy. Mason had saved me back then. I put down my suitcase, walked up to him, and grabbed a kitchen knife, pressing it against my own neck. Mason, do you see? We've always just been torturing each other. There's no need to threaten me with your life. Don't make me lose all respect for 48-209 you. Mason's tears flowed uncontrollably. But you don't want me anymore. If you want to look down on me, go ahead. I looked at him as I sliced my wrist, blood spilling everywhere. Mason was terrified, throwing the knife away as he lunged toward me. I dodged his touch and called 911. During the wait for help, he tried to approach me countless times, but I scolded him away every time. Mason, do you remember? Back in college, I wanted to jump off the rooftop countless times and end my life, and it was you who saved me. But now, I don't want to die anymore. I'm sorry, I owe you a life. Consider it repaid now. Mason sobbed uncontrollably, devastated. 48-209. Even as I got into the ambulance, I didn't look at him once. I was obsessive, maybe even a bit of a lunatic. My possessiveness over him had reached its peak. 48. There was no point in saying who was right or wrong between Mason and me. We were both crazy, and staying together only meant endless torment. But I was tired. I wanted to live like a normal person. No longer anxious, no longer a humble servant. I broke up with Mason decisively. But Mason always thought there was still a chance for us. Unable to deal with it anymore, I applied for an overseas project through my company. Life abroad was busy but fulfilling. My skills were solid and I was quiet and reserved, so I quickly got promoted. I cut off all contact with everyone back home except for Sophie. 10 years later, I returned to the country. Sophie threw me a welcome back party. After a few drinks, we were chatting about everything, and suddenly Sophie brought up Mason. It was crazy. Mason caused such a scene at your wedding back then. After you left, he went nuts searching for you for years. I heard later he tried to kill himself but failed and ended up in a vegetative state. She glanced at my face, saw that I was calm, and continued. As for Claire, she got married but luckily never had kids. That's karma for her. Good things happen to good people, Audrey. It's so nice to see you doing well. 209-48 now. I smiled faintly, feeling nothing inside. I raised my glass and drank another round with Sophie. See, back then it was life or death. But now, after moving on, life goes on just fine. The end.